Good evening, everybody. It is 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, which means it is time to study a little bit of Hasidut. Tonight we're going to be reading two teachings, one from Rabbi Israel Koznitz, known as the Koznitzer Rebbe, and one from Levi Yitzkhak of Berdichev. Now, early on in this course, we actually studied some Levi Yitzkhak, so you can go back there if you want to learn a little bit more about who he was. But tonight's focus is really going to be about this different kind of theology, this way of thinking about our relationship with God that is offered in Hasidic teachings that may be uncomfortable to us. I know personally it's uncomfortable to me, but it's definitely worth learning about because it kind of expands what a relationship with God can look like. Before we start, I want to ask the question, why do mitzvot matter? Why should we do them? Why, let's expand a little bit, where do we find purpose in our lives, and how do we measure that purpose? Is it measured against what we want? Is it measured against what others want? How do we actually define what the point is of the life we're living? That's the big question that we're going to kind of dive into tonight with these teachings. Let's jump into it. So this is from the Koznitzer Rebbe's book, Avodat Yisrael. Just by way of a bit of biography, Rabbi Israel Koznitz, born in 1737, died in 1814, also one of our early Hasidic rabbis. So here we go. From the Koznitzer. Let the fear of heaven be upon you. So that's a quote from Pirkei Avot. It says, let the fear of heaven be upon you. And then he expands on this. He says, for there are two kinds of fear. Fear of punishment and fear of the Lord. An illustration can be given of a little child into whose foot a thorn penetrates while he is running in the street. And the foot is in danger of becoming infected. The child's father, realizing that the cure is to cut a little of the flesh together with the thorn, orders the doctor to do this. The father, though he suffers terribly, hides the pain because he wishes to keep the child quiet and to assure him that all will be well. But later on, when the father sees that the child wishes once again to run about in that place, he rebukes the child by reminding him of the incident of the thorn. The child then becomes afraid and is careful that such a thing does not happen again. But if the child is clever, he's careful because he knows how much his father suffered, and it is the pain of his father that he wishes to prevent. Now, when we suffer, God suffers with us, as it were. But the suffering is ultimately for our good. Hence it says, let the fear of heaven be upon you. This means that we should so conduct ourselves that we cause no further pain to God, as it were. Let's dissect this metaphor. The child is us, and the father here is God. First of all, in most of the Hasidic parables that we've seen so far, God is a king. And here, God is being expanded to father as well. This dichotomy, notably, exists all throughout our liturgy. Avinu Malkeinu, our father, our king. God is intimately close with us, and loves us, but God is also the ruler, of this world. Here we have a child running out to the street and getting a thorn in his foot. That is a metaphor for us going about the world, going about, our daily acts, and making decisions that ultimately hurt us. These can be minor things that don't physically hurt us, like, going and eating something that's not kosher. But here, he's imagining that there's some kind of physical malady that comes from it too. Actually thinking this out, it's possible that I think he believes that when we go about and we commit, some kind of avera, some kind of sin in through Jewish law, it's like getting a thorn in our foot, which is to say, it's a small thing which can become way worse. Here, the thorn in the foot, at the moment that it happens, is removable. But if it were to stay there, it would infect the entire foot. This reminds me of the quote from Pirkei Avot, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, avera goreret avera. A mitzvah begets another mitzvah, a sin begets another sin. When we make one bad choice, it usually it has the possibility of snowballing into something bigger and bigger until it infects, our entire being. Think about one lie. If you tell a lie, a serious lie, then you're going to be stuck in a snowball of lies, of deceit, of pretending, until it infects, the whole leg, so to speak. Here, the father loves this child and wants to see this child not succumb to infection. So what does he do? He orders a doctor, and here the doctor is another important character. In Kabbalistic literature, and in just our liturgy in general, other forces are used by God to interact with the world. There's all kinds of angels that God utilizes, to work with humans. And here that doctor is one of these forces from God. The doctor is instructed by the Father to remove a little bit of flesh with the thorn. Because if the thorn can't come out of the foot, then some of the flesh has to go too in order to save the foot. And here the metaphor is, it hurts when our parent figure, who's God in this context, tries to save us. We have, when we make a bad choice, we're putting a thorn inside of our body. And God, who loves us very much, feels like God is punishing us. In the same way that if the child doesn't understand that the father's really trying to save his foot by cutting out some of the flesh with a thorn, the child will think that it's a punishment. But it's not. The father is trying to save this kid. So too, when we steer off, the right path, when we make bad choices, as Jews, according to the Koznitzer, we have this great gift that God, our Father, cares so much about us that He'll cut some of the flesh from our foot too, as it were. Remember, talking metaphors, to get that thorn out. It's a great gift that we have that parent figure who cares so much about us, even though at the time we may not understand it. And so then, the story continues where the child wants to run back out in the street without his shoes. And in the story, the father reminds the child of what happened. And the child doesn't do it. And so, why doesn't the child do it? That is the crux of the story. First, the child might be afraid of the pain from getting another thorn out, this is kind of the lowest level, according to the Koznitzer, of why one might not sin again, why this child might not run in the street again. Fear of what seems like punishment, fear of that kind of pain that comes with needing to correct that mistake, to take the thorn out of the foot, to take some of the flesh with the thorn. Fear of that pain is just the base. But he says, if the child is clever, which is to say, if this child is a little smarter than your average child, then he won't do it because he knows how much his father loves him. And he doesn't want to see his father suffer anymore. He doesn't want his father to have to call a doctor and watch his son, who he loves, get some of his flesh cut to take a thorn out. The idea that God suffers when we suffer, that this father suffers when he sees this kid with a thorn in his foot and seeing the doctor cut away the flesh, that idea is not necessarily Hasidic. That idea goes all the way back to the Talmud, the idea that God suffers when we suffer. The idea that when we're in exile, God's in exile. God is here with us, God suffers with us. Last week we talked about that, actually, about, it was Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk who said that when we're in exile, God's in exile, and because of that, we're actually, we have a chance to connect to God on a deeper level. Here, the Koznitzer says, when we suffer, God suffers. But if we are smart, if we, like this child, have maybe a stronger intellect, then we won't sin because we know the pain it brings God. Just like this child, if he's smart, according to the Koznitzer, he won't run in the street without shoes anymore, lest he get hurt, because he loves his father, and he doesn't want his father to feel that pain anymore. This is the theology that the Koznitzer offers us, which is we do mitzvot, and we refrain from the negative commandments. We refrain from breaking Shabbat. We refrain from eating unkosher foods and the like, because it brings pain to God. Now, in the 21st century, in America, the main question we ask before we do anything is, how does it make me feel? Do I connect with this mitzvah? Does it bring me meaning to not eat bacon? Does it bring me meaning to light Shabbat candles? Does it bring me meaning to sit in a sukkah? The Koznitzer turns that all on its head. He says, okay, ready? This is the challenging part. He says, it doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter if you like the mitzvah. It doesn't matter if you feel like this mitzvah brings you meaning, or if you see no value in it whatsoever. What matters is how God feels in this moment. Is God suffering? Are you bringing God suffering? And that's a huge responsibility. We've traded, as it were, personal meaning for this immense power, where now it's on us. Like, we have the ability to cause God suffering, or to bring God joy. When we do mitzvot, just like this child in the story, if he were to worry about his father's heart here, think about the joy the father would feel if that son, after that incident with the thorn, came up to him and said, I'm not going to run outside without shoes anymore because I know how much it hurt you. Now, what if we use that same line as liturgy, maybe on Yom Kippur? We said, God, I'm not going to eat shellfish anymore because I know how much it hurts you. Now, I take it or not, the personal meaning, that we get from mitzvot is not insignificant. There are mitzvot that really bring color and light into our lives. But the Koznitzer says that's not the ultimate reason why we do any of this. The ultimate reason is because it brings God joy, and when we don't do it, God suffers. It takes the focus of Judaism away from the person and brings it only to God. These are what the mitzvot are for. They're for God. They're in order to bring our Creator joy. And through them, we can express our love for God. Just like when this child wears shoes running outside, it's an expression of his love for his father. So too, when we make choices that are in line with Jewish values, it brings joy to God, whether or not we find meaning in them personally. Okay, that's theology number 1. Now, I want to look at one more teaching tonight. This is from a different early Hasidic rabbi. His name is Levi Yitzkhak of Berdichev. And also by way of biography, I'll give you his birth and death date as well. Levi Yitzkhak of Berdichev, born just 3 years after Israel Koznitz in 1740, dies in 1809. So this is from the Kedushat Levi, his major work, from which sometimes he's actually called the Kedushat Levi, by the name of his book. He's going to quote on a verse from Genesis, chapter 32-31, where Jacob says, I have seen God face to face, and I am spared. I have seen God face to face, and I am spared. So this is from the Kedushat Levi. One can serve God in order to receive all good things from God as a reward for worshiping Him. But there's a higher category than this. When one serves the Creator because He is the mighty ruler, and such one has no thought of serving God for the good he will receive from God. That second category is called face to face. When one serves God because He is the mighty ruler, then God turns toward him, as it were, face to face. But the other category is called face to back. The Creator turns to face Him, as it were, but one serves only for the sake of the good they receive from God. Hence, our verse states, I have seen God face to face, referring to the second category of worship. This is hinted at in the words, and I am spared. Here, this refers to separation. The meaning is that it never entered his head to serve God for the sake of anything that concerned himself, namely in order to receive good from God. Hence it says, and I am spared. And I am spared. I'm sparing myself. I'm, taking myself out of this. That is to say, he was spared from having his thoughts on his I. Not EYE, on his I, capital I. This category is that of lishma, which means for its own sake. And the other category is shelo lishma, not for its own sake. Here, we're given, I think, a beautiful theology of prayer. Why do we pray? Just honing in on this one mitzvah. The Koznitzer Rebbe, I think, was general, talking about all mitzvot. But here, Levi Yitzkhak of Berditchev is really focusing on prayer. When we pray to God, why are we doing it? Levi Yitzkhak says if we do it for some kind of reward, then that is called face to back. Which is to say, and this is part of this theology of prayer that I love. He says when we pray because of, but when we pray just thinking about ourselves, whether it's for some kind of reward, whether it's, whatever it is, if it's for your good, this is called not face to face, but face to back. Because when one prays, according to Levi Yitzkhak, I love this, God always turns to that person who is praying. No matter what reason the person prays, God always turns. But it's not face to face, it's face to back, because the person who's praying is not facing God. The person who's praying is only facing themselves. They've turned away from God. And so they are not praying with God face to face. It's face to back. Because even though God is facing the person who's praying, the person who is praying has turned away. On the other hand, if one prays simply because they recognize the greatness of God. He says here, because God is the mighty ruler. But we can interpret that in a number of ways. If he prays because he recognizes the greatness of God and wants to connect with God. And also, there's a second level here, which is this goal that we've mentioned before of devekut, of a deep connection and closeness to God, where one even forgets about themselves, where they get to a point of such a mindset of unity, that this whole world is one and even they are one with God. If they pray to God for that reason, to express that God is the one who runs this whole thing, that God is, king, for lack of a better metaphor, that they themselves are a part of God. And they want to strive to reach that. If they pray for that reason, then that is called face to face. Because when they pray, God faces them, and they face back. Here too, this theology is similar to the Koznitzer because it says it doesn't matter what you want. If you find meaning in prayer, if you ask yourself even the question, what good is prayer for me? Then you've already taken a step away from the goal of prayer. In the Hasidic mindset. If you ask yourself, how is prayer good for God? How does prayer unify me with God, God with the universe, all of us to each other? Not for the sake of personal benefit, but for the sake of recognizing the unity of God. Then that's prayer. And that's called face-to-face. The main lesson from both of these teachings tonight is that in this Hasidic theology, the goal is to take oneself out as much as possible. On a basic level, the goal is to take oneself out as far as the question of what good does mitzvot do for me? What good does prayer do for me? And kind of the macro goal here is to take oneself out, as to lose the sense of I, not EYE, but I, the capital I, to lose the sense of I in the great unity that is God. That is kind of the bigger goal here. So, with that, I'll give us all a blessing that we, at least one point this week in a mitzvah that we do, in a choice we make, we do so out of a love and a recognition of God's greatness, of God's unity, and we just for a moment lose ourselves in the mitzvot, connecting to God, unifying with, this great oneness, and bringing joy to our Creator. So with that, Shavua Tov, have a wonderful week. Shavua Tov to Yochev, Shaul, Philo, and Maria, and everybody else, who's joining us tonight. And I'll look forward again to next week.